Over 7 decades have passed since the Korean War, yet tensions on the peninsula remain high. In fact, they've only escalated. For almost a century, the two nations have been separate, with peace and reunification seeming more distant than ever. What's really behind this ongoing division? In this video, we'll delve into the heart of the matter. As we learned in our previous video, Korea was once a single nation, united by a common heritage. For millennia, its people shared a common life, bound by shared culture and history. However, in recent decades, they were forcibly torn apart. Their original desire was to reunite as one, yet inexplicably, they've only grown further apart. Now they've reached a point of bitter antagonism. What on earth happened to cause this? To put it bluntly, those 7 decades have passed since the Korean War. Conflict on the peninsula continues unabated. For the Korean Peninsula as a whole, to achieve lasting peace, reunification is an essential prerequisite, yet this goal appears utterly unattainable. Let's begin with a brief overview of the Korean War. At the outset, North Korea, backed by the Soviet Union, initiated the Korean War, forcing South Korea into a relentless retreat. They captured Seoul, the South Korean capital, and pushed South Korean forces back to Busan, an area less than 10,000 square kilometers. The tide turned when US forces landed at Incheon. This maneuver caught the North Korean army in a pincer movement, forcing them to retreat north of the 38th parallel. Despite repeated warnings from China, the US forces decisively crossed the 38th parallel. They then captured Pyongyang, the North Korean capital. They even managed to occupy most of North Korea's territory. The conflict escalated to the Yalu River. As far as the Yalu River, this drastically altered the nature of the Korean War. What began as a civil conflict evolved into a global confrontation. Desperate and out of options, North Korea turned to China for help. China swiftly responded to the call. They rapidly mobilized the Chinese People's Volunteers Army to join the conflict in Korea. Through the relentless efforts of these volunteers, they not only emerged victorious in numerous significant battles, but also managed to overcome the previously undefeated American forces. They drove US forces and South Korean forces back south of the 38th parallel. Ultimately, the US forces acknowledged their inability to change the course of the war. On July 27, 1953, the warring parties signed the Korean Armistice Agreement. However, this was not a peace treaty, leaving both sides technically at war. The agreement primarily stipulated that both sides withdraw 2 kilometers, creating a 4-kilometer wide demilitarized zone. The agreement was set to remain in effect indefinitely. Thus, the armistice merely paused the conflict. The underlying issues on the Korean Peninsula, without resolving for the leaders of both nations, until the Korean Peninsula is unified and a unilateral declaration of peace. This would effectively sanction the division of the Korean Peninsula. Neither side wants to shoulder this burden. As a result, both sides have remained in constant friction along the 38th parallel. Despite once aspiring for peaceful reunification, both sides put forward their own proposals, but none came to fruition. Thus, the two nations remain locked in a stalemate. However, with shifting global dynamics, leaders on both sides have come to realize that full-scale conflict is no longer feasible. To outmaneuver the other, they realized economic development was the key. Initially, South Korea's economy lagged behind North Korea's. However, the early 1960s marked a turning point. South Korea hitched its wagon to the booming US economy. They also adopted an export-driven economic strategy, which not only propelled their economy skyward, but also led to the renowned miracle on the Han River. With its rapid economic growth, South Korea joined Singapore, Taiwan, and Hong Kong as the 4 Asian tigers. In 1974, a milestone was reached. South Korea's per capita GDP surpassed North Korea's for the first time. This trend continued until 1995. South Korea's per capita GDP soared to $12,680, a staggering 51 times higher than North Korea's. North Korea was utterly blindsided by South Korea's meteoric rise. This massive economic gulf led to an ever-widening chasm in living standards, and an increasingly unbridgeable cultural divide. At both governmental and grassroots levels, a palpable atmosphere of hostility permeates. This remains a key obstacle to Korean reunification. In contrast, consider the case of East and West Germany. Germany's reunification at the end of the Cold War was successful because the root cause extends beyond Gorbachev's tacit approval. It also lies in West Germany's overall superiority over East Germany. The average economic level of East Germany and its gap with West Germany was relatively small. This comparable economic foundation allowed both leaders and ordinary citizens to find common ground in many areas. In contrast, on the Korean Peninsula, such economic parity vanished with South Korea's economic miracle. Yet the economic disparity is just one factor. The global political landscape also plays a crucial role. To understand this, we need to revisit 1953. Despite the ceasefire in the Korean War, North Korea's resolve to unify the peninsula remained unshaken. World War II had just come to an end. The global landscape was split into 2 major factions: the US-led capitalist bloc and the Soviet-socialist bloc. In its bid to strengthen its foothold in Asia, combined with North Korea's unwavering goal of reunification, the Soviet Union continued to back North Korea. Following the armistice of the Korean War, in pursuit of its reunification ambitions, North Korea not only maintained its military strength, they eagerly embraced Soviet teachings, procuring vast amounts of Soviet military hardware, modeling their army after Soviet standards, aiming to create a smaller version of the Soviet war machine to swiftly reunify Korea in any future conflict. Meanwhile, on the South Korean side, the government had become a puppet, heavily influenced by the United States, experiencing significant economic and military growth. Naturally, the US and USSR had their own agendas. Their support came with conditions, demanding compliance and control in return. Thus, the Korean conflict appeared to be a clash between two minor nations. In reality, it's major nations behind the scenes, engaged in a power play. This renders the peninsula's unification an even more daunting challenge. However, with the disintegration of the Soviet Union in 1991, North Korea lost not only Soviet support, but also any hope of unifying the peninsula. Consequently, it opted for self-reliance, focusing on building its own power. Regardless of the outcome, the goal was to enhance its deterrent capabilities. This ultimately transformed the Korean issue into a pivotal factor in Northeast Asian geopolitics. From this point, the North Korean Army's true mission shifted from unifying the peninsula to preserving the North Korean regime. Any reduction in North Korea's military strength directly threatens the regime's survival. This impasse remains the key obstacle to Korean unification, despite the Panmunjom Declaration, signed by both Korean leaders, being the latest effort to break the deadlock. As South Koreans often point out, America's influence looms large in all Korean affairs. Until the true power brokers step back, unification will remain elusive on the Korean Peninsula. Globally, we observe that, regardless of historical shifts and transformations, national unity and division remain timeless global issues. Be it the two Koreas today, the once sea-divided Germany, or the mainland China and Taiwan, setting aside complex political realities and focusing on our shared humanity, we sincerely wish for all separated families to reunite, for all estranged relatives to reconcile, and for all divided peoples to come together again. Thank you for staying with us until the end. Stay tuned for more fascinating content in our next episode.